Hello.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well. So, what grade are you in now?
I am in ninth grade.
Haven't seen you since fifth grade. That's crazy. So, thank you for doing this. I know how busy you are. So, I won't take up too much of your time. So, did you decide on a topic that you were going to be sharing with us?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about how language, like the option to learn a language, should be available since first grade and onwards.
Okay, very nice. So, basically, you're saying the thing that you feel we didn't have or you didn't have the
Yeah.
opportunity to learn was different languages, I'm assuming, other than English?
Yeah, and also through fifth and sixth grade, the only language is Spanish.
Okay, so what are your thoughts? Why don't you walk us through what you're thinking?
I'm thinking that I've got a quote that says about how languages are best to learn since 10 years and under, which
Okay.
we aren't given the option to do until fifth and sixth grade, which I think is 12 or 11.
Yeah. It's 10 to
And
12, yeah.
yeah, and it talks about how I'm going to talk about how language is important for your future, jobs, colleges, all that stuff. It makes you a more interesting person. It gives you options to go places, live in different areas, and learning about languages also gives you the availability to experience like different cultures in the world. Like I'm learning about Chinese, and we also learn about Chinese culture and the Great Wall, Tiananmen Square, stuff like that.
So, what made you choose Chinese?
Well, I in the beginning, my parents forced me to because
I like the
well,
honesty.
I was going to go to French with my friends, but mom and dad said that Chinese is a really important language, and and it is. It's the most common language of the world. With something like nearly 1 billion people speak it. Dialects, but if you yeah. So
I mean, I imagine just because of the sheer population in China as well, like, of
yeah.
course, that would
Mhm.
be a very high number. So that's first of all, that's amazing. It's fantastic that you chose to study that. So how have you felt benefited by learning Chinese?
Well, in the if once I continue to learn Chinese, it'll give me like more options to do stuff in the future. Like I said before,
Hmm.
career options, places to live. I can go to China for a while, talk to people, I and stuff like that. In addition, learning a language, any language really, just gives your mind opportunities to learn more. Learning languages helps develop different parts of your mind, and especially Chinese with tonal languages like that.
Hmm. Yeah.
It develops different parts of your mind and stuff like that.
And so now you were just reading something from an article, I think, right? So what was the resource that you're using, or what's the article or website
The
or?
article is called sciencedirectassets.com.
Okay. And so you feel like at what grade do you think would be appropriate to start learning another language in addition to English? And also, how do you think you would decide like what languages that should be? What languages do you think should be offered?
I think from first grade and on would be a good time to start. It a little the earlier the better, but I mean first grade's the starting point for stuff, right?
I can see that because I do think that when you are so young, your brain is a sponge and you are definitely absorbing so much information. So that would make sense to expose kids at that age. So, of course, I'm a huge fan of the idea. I love traveling. You know this about me. I love exposing
Hmm.
myself and others to new cultures and languages. And I do speak more than one language as well. So, of course, I can see the benefit of it, of course. Sometimes I do hear and find that some families resist having to learn other languages. Why do you think that might be?
I'm not too sure. It might be because nowadays so many people have so many things to do, and
Mm,
learning a language does take up time, and you do have to work towards that level of like proficiency,
yes.
and it takes a lot of effort and a lot of concerted time at it. In addition, like instruments or anything else like that, and a lot of people just don't have a lot of time in their life anymore to do stuff.
So true. So true. Do you feel like there's also a fear of losing your own culture and your own identity sometimes at a young age? Like, let's say that you're a native, let's say native Spanish speaker, and then it were to become a requirement that they learn, let's say French, and you're at such a young age, an impressionable age. Do you think there might be a fear that, okay, well, then they're only going to focus on the French and they'll forget about their like Spanish speaking identity? Do you think that can
I
be?
think for parents that might be a little fear
Mm,
that their kids will grow up learning so much about like different cultures and different languages that they'll forget about their own culture and past ancestors. But that's not really true. I mean, it just opens your mind to different ways of thinking and just helps you along and lets you see the world from different points.
I mean, I totally agree. So you're saying starting from first grade. Now, how do you think you would go about deciding which languages? Because I think there's been some conversation about how in the intermediate school, at least in Bridgewater, New Jersey, I'm sure it's different all around the country and even
Mhm.
within New Jersey, we have just Spanish, which I think is amazing. And I love that they do that. But so I'm guessing you're saying it shouldn't be just Spanish?
I think there should be a couple different options, such as Mandarin. Spanish should stay. Spanish is important. Romance languages sort of go together, blend a little, and yeah, just different options.
And as you think about your future, whether it's for work or whether it's for traveling, whether it's for where you want to live, do you feel like it builds your confidence in doing that by learning a different language other than English?
Definitely, it gives you like a different part of yourself you can go to, and it makes you more confident in your ability to learn things, like your smarts, all that, and
Can you walk us through a little how what the process is like? How do you learn Chinese? What have you found most interesting about it? What have you found really challenging about it? What has been really anything that you can share about your experience?
Mhm. So we haven't so about how we learn Chinese for first, it'll probably all blend together, but we don't really focus on in the first couple of years. It was hard because it was interrupted thanks to COVID and we had to learn
Oh,
online, which was harder. But
yes.
we didn't really focus on how to write characters. We focused on understanding words that are spoken to us. We had a lot of different listening quizzes where we would have uh, Mandarin spoken to us, and we would have to try to translate that. And we
Okay.
focused more on pinyin, which is writing down in the alphabet, just
Okay.
writing it down. Focused less on characters. We focused less on tonal pronunciation. But now that we've entered high school, we're starting to focus a little more on that tonal pronunciation. Starting to focus a little more on characters. We're writing down characters for quizzes and stuff. Learning how to write them, and probably the most challenging is the different ways to say the same word because
Okay.
there's like four different ways to say like nah or whatever the word is. There's at least two ways, more most of the time three or even four, and it's
Okay.
just whether it's nah nah nah. It's just all it's
So the emphasis.
yeah. It's just pronunciation. That's probably the hardest one for me.
Okay. And what about culture-wise? I think you mentioned earlier that you're not only learning language, but through language, then language is so the beautiful part is that it's tied into so many different things, right? It's tied into culture, it's tied into relationships, it's tied into how you communicate, which is everything in life, really, right? How you communicate, how you build relationships from that, how you basically build communities from that, the food that's tied into it. So, what are some things about the culture that you've learned now as an extension of that?
Like you said, we've learned about Chinese instruments
Oh,
and
cool.
yeah, different types of the modern instruments that we have today. Well, modern like cello, violin, viola, even sometimes the horns. But in addition, we've learned about the Chinese way of teaching students and well, not way of teaching, but how the grade system goes. And it's 1 through 6, 7, 8, 9, and then 10, 11, 12 is the high
Okay.
school.
Okay.
And in addition, we've also learned about the Chinese way of like thinking, how their culture is, and it's based a good amount on their ancestry, respecting their elders, and keeping customs and traditions alive.
So I can tell just by speaking to you, even in this short amount of time, that this experience and exposure, because of course you're not a native Chinese speaker,
No.
or by background, of course you're not Chinese, Australian, correct?
Yeah.
And you have already, it seems like, gained an understanding and respect. And I think that that's something, or would you say that that is something that is a big part of also a big part of why introducing language at a younger age can be important because it does also teach you how to be respectful without having to say it directly, like let's be respectful, just by thinking about why language is spoken somewhere the way it is, the way it's taught the way it is, the way they think the way they think, the way they teach the way they teach, just by having to think about that, do you feel like that promotes and almost forces respect to exist in a way?
Definitely, it opens your mind to those different ways of thinking instead of just focusing around your own culture and not really being shown those different ways of thinking and going about life. And learning language definitely helps with that and helps you understand those people's ways of thinking.
Do you think that you have become more, or maybe those that you're studying with have learned a lot and have become more respectful as a result of learning Chinese, or do you think that there's no connection there?
No, I would say they've definitely become more respectful of other cultures and more understanding, even if it's in an indirect way. They've definitely, me myself included, we've gained that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very good. What would you say to somebody who were to argue that, or like, I guess, counter that by saying, this is America, we speak English here. We don't need to learn about any other languages, because there is that mentality too. So what would you say to somebody who were to argue that?
I would say that's just no offense to them, but that's just not the right way to go about thinking about those things, because America or whatever country you live in is not the only place in the world that matters, and there's so many other places, things, so many different people, so many different ways of thinking, and yes, while your own culture definitely probably has those things that are better than other cultures, there's so many more ways all those other cultures in the world have better ways of thinking and doing things than your own.
We all have things to learn from each other is basically what
Yeah.
you mean, and this is a way to do
Definitely.
it. This is definitely a way to do it. How do you feel like language or learning another language can also help with building relationships with other people?
I think with the language you're speaking or learning, um, the native speakers of that language. So let's say you're learning Spanish. Native Spanish speakers feel more comfortable around you. You can help them if they've just moved to a different place. You can speak their language, help them along, strengthen bonds, and be that sort of connection between like everyone else and them. And that really helps them and those other people who have been living in whatever area.
A lot of times I'll hear friends or whoever I might be speaking to when they're talking about traveling to another country or thinking about traveling. A lot of times they'll be like, "Ooh, but they don't speak English there." And I think there's something very humble about recognizing that they don't need to change what they're speaking. I should learn what they are speaking if I'm planning to travel there, right? That should be my responsibility. So do you agree with that? Do you feel like, have you seen that or experienced that?
I've definitely agree with you on the fact that we shouldn't expect other people to change to our needs, especially if we're traveling to their own country, which has had their way of speaking and doing things. We should have to adapt to them,
Yeah,
or at least understand their way of doing, and at least try to adapt to them. Even if we
absolutely.
can't, we should just definitely try our best to get, adapt to them and instead of or expecting them to
Right.
have to speak our language or do our ways of doing things.
Do you think that learning it, like, so let's say a student is learning French in the first grade, do you think that that means that they're likely to continue studying that language and then they would become proficient in it? Or do you just think it's important just to expose them and give them the opportunity to figure out what they want to learn?
There's definitely both routes to it. You could go down the path of you continue learning that language and you become proficient, and that gives you a different set of skills to, well, most people, I would say, because not many people are 100 like really proficient at speaking a different language,
Right.
and but there's also the route of saying you could just learn one language for 4 years, a different language, and a different language even that just opens your mind to even more ways of thinking, and that's honestly fine also because it gives you more different ways and it gives you a little bit of understanding about each of those.
I also imagine it has to just do with the availability of people who are able to do that, because it's one thing to speak a language or a different language, but then be able to know it so well that you can teach it to someone else. I think the availability for that is probably also part of the challenge, especially for the younger grades. But I'm really glad that you shared that, and that's a really good point and something to consider. And I think that which languages to be taught is always an interesting conversation, because I know that being at Hillside or in fifth grade, the fact that only Spanish is spoken, we have heard some parents say like, well, why is it Spanish? Why is it not this language or that language?
Mhm.
And I do think it has to do a lot with just the fact that Spanish is such a common language in America. So I think that has
Yes.
a lot to do with it. Also,
Yeah.
there's so many Spanish speaking countries, of course.
Mhm.
But there is a conversation to be had about, okay, well, can we add to that?
Mhm.
And of course, then that gets into the conversation about workload and is it too much and this
Yeah.
and that. If you had to pick a language that you wish you could have learned in first grade, second grade, third grade, which do you think it would be Mandarin, or do you think it would?
To me, it would definitely be Mandarin because now learning it, it's very hard to have that tone of pronunciation, and I understand that the earlier you learn it, the more likely you are to pick up that tone of pronunciation. The more you hear people speaking it, and the more you get used to it, and it would definitely be Chinese, especially if even in those first couple years of learning that language. Since you're pretty young, you don't learn much. You would still be exposed to that way of speaking and that tone of
Feel
pronunciation.
comfortable with that.
Yeah,
Have you reached the stage where you can like overhear a conversation in the grocery store and you're like, oh, I know what you're saying? Because they probably don't assume that you understand.
yeah. I don't think many people like would assume that the person next to them would understand what they're saying if they're speaking in a different language that's native. And I can pick up some bits and pieces of I hear like Mandarin families, Chinese families speaking in Mandarin, and I pick up bits and pieces. I don't have a full like I pick up some words that I'm like, oh right, that's that, and yeah.
Okay. Do you have plans of traveling there? I mean, maybe not anytime soon, but is that something that you would love to do?
Yeah, my dad for his work earlier, he traveled everywhere and he really enjoyed Singapore and China, Hong Kong, places like that. And I personally haven't been able to travel to that area, and I think it's just a great part of the world, and so much different than here, and it would be amazing to go to places like that.
I definitely hope that you hold on to that, and I definitely hope you do it, and I hope that when you do it, you let me know how it is. I think that was great. I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
All right, thank
Thank
you.
you so much, Grafton.
Bye.
Bye.